Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Gapsky, and I'm the Speakers Director of the William F. Buckley Jr. program at Yale. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this afternoon's discussion on the state of intellectual discourse and free speech at law schools and on college campuses more generally. Before we begin the event, I'd like to say a few words about the Buckley program and then introduce our moderator and guests. The William F. Buckley Jr. program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion at Yale. We've hosted lectures, dinner seminars, firing line debates, and an annual conference each year since 2011. Our over 500 Buckley Fellows hold a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley program has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and more representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new ideas, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow on our website at buckleyprogram.com. Now for introductions. Our moderator, Akhil Amar, is Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University, where he teaches constitutional law in both Yale College and Yale Law School. After graduating from Yale College summa cum laude in 1980 and from Yale Law School in 1984, and clerking for then Judge, now Justice Stephen Breyer, Amar joined the Yale faculty in 1985 at the age of 26. His work has won awards from both the American Bar Association and the Federalist Society, and he has been cited by Supreme Court justices across the spectrum in more than 40 cases. James C. Ho is a circuit judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Before taking the bench on January 4th, 2018, he was a partner and co-chair of the National Appellate and Constitutional Law Practice Group of Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher. As an appellate litigator for over a decade, including 3 years as the Solicitor General of Texas, Judge Ho presented 50 oral arguments in federal and state courts nationwide. Elizabeth L. Branch was appointed to serve as a circuit judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit in March of 2018. From 2012 to 2018, she served as a judge on the Court of Appeals of Georgia. Prior to her judicial service, she spent her entire private practice career in commercial litigation at Smith, Gambrill, and Russell in Atlanta, from summer clerk to associate to partner. One last thing. Disruption of an event is not consistent with Yale's policies on free expression. I would ask that each of you respect the right of our speakers to be heard and the right of your fellow audience members to listen to the event. Thank you for joining us in upholding our university's core values. And now I'll turn things over to Judge Ho.
First of all, thank you, Ryan, for the kind introductions and for putting all of us in this room together. I'm very honored to be invited by the Buckley program here at Yale University. I'm especially not just honored, but delighted to be here with my friends. And I use friends, and when I say the children version of the word friends, as opposed to the grown-up word of friends. When you're a grown-up, everybody's a friend, but we generally are friends. We've had, I don't know how many conversations over the years, just knowing each other all this time. So it's a genuine delight to be with you all, Professor Amar and Judge Branch. One of the most rewarding aspects of being a federal judge, at least to me, is that I have the opportunity to preside over a naturalization ceremony every year in May, which is something I do to commemorate my own naturalization 40 years ago this past May. If you've never, for what it's worth, if you've never attended a naturalization ceremony, I strongly recommend it because you'll be inspired, reinvigorated about this amazing country we call America. And that's because you get to see people from all around the world coming together in one room for one purpose, to become Americans. And it reminds you that what binds our nation is not a common race or religion or philosophical point of view. What unites us is not a common past, but a common hope for the future. People aren't eager to come to America because we're a failed nation. People are eager to come to America because we're the most successful nation in human history. And I would submit that one of the principal reasons for our success is that we're governed by a written constitution that is founded on the principles of freedom, federalism, and respect for diverse viewpoints. Let's begin with the First Amendment and freedom of speech. As a strictly legal matter, the First Amendment, of course, applies only to the government. So it doesn't require private citizens to respect the speech of others. But I would submit that if you think that's the whole story, that's an impoverished understanding of what it means to live in a nation based on freedom. Professor Amar actually gave a very eloquent speech on this very topic over a decade ago. It's one that continues to resonate with me to this day. You explained that the First Amendment doesn't just protect freedom of speech, it protects the freedom of speech, a freedom that pre-exists the First Amendment. You reminded us that the Constitution, how it came about in the first place, through state ratifying conventions. These were robust, rigorous, open debates where people actually listened to one another. Debates where even if you didn't win on your particular point, you knew that you were at least heard. And in fact, it's precisely because people listened and admitted when they were wrong that we have a First Amendment in the first place. And that's because the ratification debates essentially forced the Federalists to agree to a Bill of Rights in order to ensure ratification. So as you observed, the textual guarantee of freedom of speech arose precisely because of the actual practice of freedom of speech. I think that's a wonderful insight. To that, I would just humbly add one other aspect of the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that I think is worth noting and I think supports your wonderful point. The Federalists proposed a new constitution in the wake of the failure of the Articles of Confederation. They wanted to establish one country, a federal government, one of limited enumerated powers, to be sure, but their goal was to unify the several states, finally, at last, into one great country. And they emphasized the significant advantages that flow from scale. If you read the first dozen or so Federalist Papers, you'll see Jay and Hamilton recount numerous military, foreign policy, economic benefits that accrue from establishing one large, stable nation. You ensure national and domestic security and safety. You avoid foreign wars and entanglements. You achieve greater economic gains by having free and open trade over a larger population of customers and providers. You get to pull the best talent from a larger pool of citizens, both for governance and industry. In response, the Anti-Federalists essentially said that the Federalists were crazy, that you can't possibly hope to establish such a large, stable nation. Never in human history, they said, have we ever seen a republic anywhere near the size of the proposed United States of America. That you can only have a republic if it's small and the population homogeneous. Because if your population is large and diverse, they argued, you're just going to spend all of your time, all of your energy squabbling with each other. You'll never get anything done. So too many people, in their view, means too much conflict, not enough cohesion. So to sum up, the Federalists believed in the benefits of scale, and the Anti-Federalists countered with the difficulty of diversity and the fear of faction and balkanization. So how did the Federalists prevail? By assuring the people that our Constitution would respect our nation's diversity. We would respect community differences and local rules. We would have a national government, but it would be limited. We would do at the national level what had to be done at the national level, and we'd leave everything else to state and local governance to reflect the great diversity of our nation. In other words, our founders understood that in such a large country, disagreement is inevitable, but we would tolerate our diversity and encourage interaction and discourse in the face of our differences. This founding vision is not just reflected in our founding document. It's why Congress included the words e pluribus unum in the Great Seal of the United States, out of many, one. It's why Alexis de Tocqueville observed in Democracy in America that Americans are not easily offended, but instead we work together to accomplish great undertakings despite our vigorous differences. But here's the catch. It's not enough that our country is governed by the same constitutional text as our forefathers were. We also have to share their constitutional values. President Washington explained in his farewell address that virtue is a necessary spring of popular government. President Adams echoed this sentiment in his 1789 address to the Massachusetts militia, stating that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So we have to nurture and pass down our values from one generation to another, or else our founders' vision will not work. The Federalists won the debate, but I worry that the Anti-Federalists may ultimately be proven right. Because what we're seeing increasingly on college campuses today is not always respect for diverse viewpoints, but all too often intolerance of dissent. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression recently published a study on the state of free speech on college and university campuses. They found that 55% of students engage in self-censorship. That is, they censor what they say to others because they fear retaliation. In addition, they found that 63% of students reported that they worry about damaging their reputations based on what they might say in public. That includes 62% of Democrats, 64% of independents, 63% of Republicans. Now look, it would be one thing if this phenomenon were really just limited to the university campus, if it were all just part of the collegiate experience, like bad cafeteria food and cramped dorm rooms, right? If that's all it was, you know, just survive your time in college, 4 years, however many years, graduate school, survive it, move on with your life, and leave that all behind. If that's what this was all about, honestly, I seriously doubt that I would take time away from my family to fly across the country to have these discussions about this topic. So here's why I'm here. Over the past few years, I have seen more and more what happens on what happens on campus affects the rest of us, affects the rest of the world. And it particularly hurts young people as they start to leave school and enter the working world. It turns out that when universities tolerate, or in fact teach sometimes, that there are no consequences for intolerance and illiberalism, that message sticks with people. When we teach students to cancel others in the classroom, they take these lessons and use them on their employers, on coworkers, on fellow citizens across the country. As it turns out, what happens on campus doesn't stay on campus. The Supreme Court, for what it's worth, has been warning us of the perils of cancel culture since 2010. And I think it's only gotten worse since that time. We've now reached the point, for example, where powerful law firm leaders, as well as tenured law professors at top law schools, are routinely telling journalists, typically off the record, that they're afraid of their own associates and their own law students. So let that fact marinate for a moment. Why are they so afraid? These are not foolish, powerless people, after all. What is it that they fear that cancel culture can do to their lives, their careers, their families? And what does that say about the world that we're living in today? I think it says that we're no longer content to simply engage with one another, resolve our differences in the political sphere. Instead, we expel people from social and economic life, or at least we do so with every resource at our disposal. We're starting to live in a culture of cancellation, not conversation. We don't talk, we tweet. We don't disagree, we destroy. This is not just wrong. It's antithetical to our nation's founding. It's unsustainable and existential. Because if one person does it, others will follow. And if we all do it, then the logical consequence is this: no more interaction, no more cooperation with anybody who disagrees with us, which is a lot of people. And this is exactly what the Anti-Federalists feared. Cancel culture is a cancer on our culture, and we need to cure now before it's too late. I cannot imagine a greater threat to democracy, because I don't see how citizens will feel comfortable participating in our nation's democracy if they have to put their livelihoods at risk every time they participate in our nation's discourse. It's no wonder that citizens no longer trust a wide variety of once leading institutions, because when elite institutions announce that people with certain views shouldn't even exist, people return the favor. Now, that's all rather dour talk on my part. I'm going to end on a note of hopefulness. I understand that Jonathan Mitchell, former Solicitor General of Texas, recently spoke at Yale Law School. I'm told that he was met with rigorous but ultimately respectful questions, and that he was not disrupted, he was not prevented from speaking. I understand that Kristen Wagoner may be coming back as well to address a topic of her choosing. Hopefully that will go smoothly as well. And I've also heard from a variety of sources that there are law school deans all around the country actively engaging with their students and cautioning them not to run into the same problems, not to create the same kind of dynamics that were unfortunately seen this past year. We need to restore our founding principles, reaffirm what makes America truly unique, and remind ourselves how to agree to disagree. In a nation with over 300 million people, we are bound to disagree on a great many issues, often passionately, often emotionally. But our founders firmly believed that we would be better off as one nation. I believe that they are right. I hope they are still right. Thank you.
Judge Branch.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you to the William F. Buckley program for inviting us to Yale. I know that both Judge Ho and I welcome the opportunity to discuss the importance of free speech on campus. And so let me open with a quote from the Supreme Court's 1949 Terminiello v. City of Chicago case. Quote, "A function of free speech under our system of government is to invite dispute. It may indeed best serve its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest or even stirs people to anger. Speech is often provocative and challenging. It may strike at prejudices and preconditions and have profound unsettling effects as it presses for acceptance of an idea. Free speech is hard, and that's the point, but it's necessary to a free society." And Justice Amy Coney Barrett emphasized these principles at her speech at the Reagan Library earlier this year. She said, "The reason why we have a First Amendment, the reason why we have free speech is to protect unpopular speech, because popular speech doesn't need the protection. And I think that for our democracy to thrive, I think for educational institutions to thrive, everything has to be on the table, including protests. I think people need to be able to disagree. People need to be able to express ideas. I think what can't happen, especially in academic institutions, is for any idea to be pushed off the table. I think you have to engage with those ideas, show why those ideas are wrong." She's right. Once you leave school and enter the workplace, you will be faced with ideas often that you detest. And do you know how people have traditionally handled such conflict? We disagree, we debate, and then at the end of the day, we remain friends. Somehow that art has gotten lost and needs to be regained. During school, when confronted with contrary perspectives, you should strive to learn how to address them in a civilized world. You might actually be persuaded by them. At the very least, you will refine your own arguments against them. As a judge, while I may not always enjoy responding to another judge's dissent, a dissent always makes my majority opinion stronger. I remember being confronted with objectionable speech when I was a law student back in the early to mid-90s. We learned that a Holocaust denier was being invited to speak at various campuses. We were horrified and we were torn about what our response should be. We were angry that the school had invited him in the first place, but he was coming. We thought about attending and letting him know that we thought he was an awful human being to espouse such hateful nonsense. We thought about attending and asking tough questions to expose him for the fraud that he was. But we were torn because we didn't want him to have an audience. So what did we do? We stayed home, and so did everyone else. And because no one went, he was never invited back. By staying away, we showed that his speech was truly unpopular, and so the invitations dried up. And that is a very powerful way to protest. So why aren't students today following the quite effective protest model that I witnessed in the early to mid-90s? Why are the protesters not only attending the lectures given by people they disagree with? Why are they trying to disrupt the speech? Perhaps they are afraid that the speech is not as unpopular as they would like. If it was truly unpopular, everyone would stay home and no one would invite the lecturer to an event again. These speakers are, however, popular. But because the students do not agree with the speaker's viewpoint, they are refusing to allow these speeches to happen. And that approach is a grave concern and short-sighted as to the consequences. So other than the heckler's veto, what options do students have? First, I would advise the students leading the protest to consider what is their end game. What are both the short and long-term goals of the protest? They clearly don't like what the speaker will say in the speech, but the objection is deeper, I'm afraid. Do they believe the speaker should not think that way? Perhaps. But I seriously doubt that a student protest, however loud, will change a speaker's mind. In fact, it will likely cause the speaker to double down, as is human nature when confronted. Are the students trying to ensure that others don't think that way as well? Perhaps. And it might seem like this goal succeeds if the protest is shut down, but it really doesn't. Anyone who wants to hear the speaker because they're interested in the ideas being discussed can simply watch the speaker online or attend another off-campus event. So here's my concern. Is the goal to silence dissent? To prohibit all viewpoints that the protesters disagree with? I hope that's not the case. That approach is antithetical to American society and our Constitution. So I mentioned the students leading the protest. Why did I focus on them? Because they're why we're having this discussion. But what of the others? What about students who wanted to protest but not disrupt and yet got swept into the chaos? Some are true believers, that's certain, but I suspect others may have participated out of fear. I have seen firsthand that students are bullying other students into showing solidarity with these disruptive protests. To those students facing such pressure, I offer encouragement. Please stand up for what you believe. The easiest course of action may be to cave into the mob. But I assure you, you lose a little bit of your soul when you do that. Stand up, hold firm. I assure you that no one ever respects anyone who caves in. No one. They may tell you they respect you, but they really see you as weak. And no one respects someone who's weak. You're all adults now. You need to be able to withstand the peer pressure. It will be extraordinarily difficult. You may lose friends, but you will be able to face yourself every morning. And you will be an example to like-minded students who need to see your show of strength. And please know, you are not alone. But once you decide to protest, what then? I remain a proponent of the approach we took to Holocaust denier. Don't show up. If no one else does, the speaker won't be invited back. I also favor attending the event and asking tough questions during the Q&A period. Every speaker should be prepared to defend his ideas. And if students nonetheless continue to shout down speakers on campus, they must be prepared to face the consequences. Certainly it goes without saying, if you physically threaten a speaker, and you should be aware that large groups can cross lines pretty easily, criminal charges are certainly possible. Also, the school likely has a speech code, and violations should be disciplined. Thus far, schools have been hesitant to do much, but that can change at any moment, and it will likely surprise the protesters when it does. I can assure you that fatigue is growing for disruptive protests, and public and alumni calls for action are increasing. Never underestimate the power of a school donor. And perhaps, most significantly, the grand consequence is the loss of debate, the hallmark of our country, and the fact that the protesting students have interfered with their peers who wanted to hear the speaker. The protesters know that and don't seem to care. But if nothing else convinces you, I leave students contemplating disruptive protest with the words of Justice Black in his dissent to Communist Party v. Subversive Activities Control Board. I do not believe that it can be too often repeated that freedom of speech must be accorded to the ideas we hate, or sooner or later, they will be denied to the ideas we cherish. Thank you.
So I've been invited just to say a few words of response, and I mean just a few, because I want to get you all in, and you're going to be able to ask all sorts of questions. I hope you're going to ask hard questions of our panelists, because that's what they came for. So I think in honor of William Buckley, I probably should just start with the phrase "for God, for country, and for Yale. Now, you've heard a lot basically about political expression, but it's important to remember that free speech is also very important for religious expression. Judge Branch mentioned Holocaust denial. That, of course, reminds us of the Holocaust and the experience of especially Jews around the world, not uniquely Jews, but especially Jews around the world. But free speech is very important for people to be able to find for themselves ultimate truth about the nature of the infinite and their relationship to it. I'm looking at my friend Laura because she's actually in the Div school. And this place started as a Div school, actually, but now we're so much more than a Div school for one denomination, which takes me to country. So happy anniversary, Judge Ho. He just said that he recently marked the 40th anniversary of his naturalization. I could even say happy birthday in a way. Naturalization from the French naître, to be born. We talk about natural born citizens, and then actually in America you can be treated for almost all purposes, I hope one day for more purposes, you can be treated as if you were born a citizen if you are naturalized as opposed to natural born. You still can't be eligible to the presidency, and I think that's wrong. I actually testified against that and in favor of a constitutional amendment supported by a great Republican. I'm a Democrat, Orrin Hatch, who thought it was not right that people who weren't lucky enough to be born citizens, as I was, thought it wasn't right that they should be ineligible. So happy birthday, happy anniversary. I do want to echo several things that Judge Ho said. One, if you've never been, how many of you have been to a naturalization ceremony? Raise your hands. They're amazing events, and go if you can. I've spoken at a naturalization ceremony, invited by a friend who was a judge. Judges are good friends to have in general. And it was very meaningful. It was like a kind of a mass wedding of a certain sort. That's how I felt. My own parents are naturalized Americans. I want to pick up on another thing that Judge O said. They were born in undivided India. My mom passed away a few months ago. My dad's still around. And I'm so very grateful that they chose to come to the United States, as I think Judge Ho is. And that's going to have some implications, you see, but I'm going to just do a certain thing here. How many of you have at least one grandparent who was not born in the United States? Raise your hands. Just look around. Okay? And Judge, you can raise your hand too, right? Okay.
I thought that went without saying.
Okay. Wow. And that's not true in India. So ours is not just a democracy. It's a democracy almost unique in the world. I'm an American exceptionalist, so I heard is my friend Jim Ho. I bet Judge Branch is too, but here's what this means, because you see there are very, very few democracies in the world where the grandchildren of all the other peoples of the world are trying to get together and make a go of it. That's just not true in Germany, which is a great democracy, in France, which is a great democracy. It's almost as good as California, but not quite. And California actually is more open to people of different faiths and backgrounds, you see. But now here's what that means. We don't have race in common. We don't have language even, necessarily native language in common, or ethnicity, or religion, or all the other sorts of things that bind other peoples together. What we have is our Constitution, our laws, our national narrative, a national story, and that includes, of course, our commitment to the Constitution's free speech principles. So that's a little bit about God, a little bit about country. Now, finally about Yale. You see, the First Amendment doesn't bind Yale. Yale is not a government actor. So Yale doesn't have to abide by free speech because of the Constitution. But here's why Yale has to abide by free speech, because we have our own mission. We are older than the United States, than the First Amendment, than the Constitution. And Our commitment at Yale is one of looks at veritas, light and truth, and it's about preserving truth and finding new truth and spreading light and truth to the world. Harvard's only truth. But they're only veritas. We're looks at veritas, you see. And see, why light? See, here's what's amazing about light. Why do they call it the Enlightenment? See, because if I have a candle and I give it to you, then I don't have the candle anymore, you know. But if I have a lighted candle and I light your candle, oh, mine can still be lit and yours too. Light spreads faster than, you know, anything, 186,000 miles per second. So when you look from outer space, there's one place on the planet that's utterly dark. It's North Korea, you see, because there is no light there. Because it's opposed to this Enlightenment project. It looks at veritas. So we're not bound by the First Amendment. We're bound by deeper ideas. Human knowledge cannot actually advance without this sort of debate. In the sciences, but in the humanities as well. So I just said a little bit about God, a little bit about country, and a little bit about Yale. And now it's time for you all to jump into the conversation. Aaron. And have at them.
So thank you both for being here. My name is Aaron. I am a conservative on campus, and I'm involved with a lot of groups like the Buckley program that frequently put me into the public ire. As a freshman, I wrote some controversial articles, and I was referred to as he who shall not be named on Twitter, as though I was Voldemort. It's not a very positive campus for people who have different viewpoints, which is why I've gotten involved with programs like the Buckley program. I agree that people should stand up for their beliefs when they're controversial on campus, but it worries me that when judges come out and say that they're going to boycott students like from Yale Law School who are in the Federalist Society, which is an organization that is working to improve the culture on campus, in many ways that might discourage people who are conservatives from going to these campuses in the first place and helping to improve them. How will we fix the culture of students? Because primarily the problem on campuses are being driven by students, not administration. How are we going to get students to act more appropriately if all of the conservatives suddenly boycott Yale with the judges?
Wonderful question. What I've tried to make clear, and the speech that you're referring to that I gave at the Kentucky Federal Society is actually published. So I've tried to lay out the whole theory of sort of how I approach these things. It's not something I want to do. And in fact, I made very clear, if somebody has a better idea, I am all ears. The objective is very simple. It's to restore free speech, and especially to restore free speech at honestly, the elite institutions that are most influential on the entire American society. There's no question the legal profession plays a leading role in America and in shaping American culture. And there's no question that Yale, you made the Harvard joke, so I'm sure that there are debates about what's the finest law school. I might put Chicago, where I went, into the mix, if you will. But there's no question Yale is amongst, if not the, most acclaimed law school on the planet. That carries with it enormous influence. What concerns me is the extent to which recent experiences have sent quite the opposite message. If it's representing itself to be the leading institution, the most influential, the most effective and persuasive, and sending the message that is completely contrary to, I think, what sort of binds at least our discussions today about respect for diverse viewpoints, embrace of rigorous discussion. I'll just tell you, in my own experience, it's, when we talk about law school experiences, obviously we all think of our own. And while I would not say that it was a super friendly environment to conservatives, it was honestly quite pleasant. I have wonderful memories of my experience. I'm sad to hear that your experiences, at least so far, have not been that way. I had wonderful 4 years at Stanford, wonderful 3 years at the University of Chicago Law School. And it's not because the place was homogeneously of a certain viewpoint, and certainly not of my viewpoint. But the reason I loved it is because I don't think I remember a single incident where I felt anything other than respect, where I had the opportunity to make arguments, to learn from my classmates, to learn where they think I'm wrong, to learn where I might realize that I was wrong, and change my views and mature and learn. And even if you ultimately are a more stubborn type, and you think, nope, I'm right, and I'm not, frankly, you should still listen, because, and this is especially true of law students, you should want to get better at defeating arguments you think are wrong or indeed aberrant. I spoke at Georgetown a while ago about the Ilya Shapiro incident, and what I said is, look, my point is not that you should all agree with Ilya Shapiro. My point is actually, for those who disagree, you should be the most opposed to getting rid of him, because I would want him to be a foil, the person from which I can debate every day at school, and I can learn from, and I can figure out how to defeat his best arguments. That's the way that lawyers are supposed to be trained. And so that's the goal here. It's not to, I know Yale itself is engaged in its own boycott of U.S. news. My goal is not to cancel U.S. news or to cancel anybody. My goal is for the cancellations to stop. So I would love nothing more than this hopeful trend that I sort of noted in my remarks, that things appear to be changing for the better, not just at Yale, but actually I'm getting this vibe nationwide. That's the only goal here, is to stop the cancellations across the board.
And I would join Jim in saying, our goal is to restore, to help, to play a small part at least in restoring free speech to campus. Of course, I'm assuming most people are aware, we have a carve-out for all students who have graduated, all currently enrolled students, so this would only affect people incoming, and our greatest hope would be to see improvement such that this boycott never actually comes into effect. And I think having us here is certainly a nice step in that direction, as are other things that we have seen that have happened on campus already. But keep in mind, too, that Jim and I both started off with smaller steps. In fact, Judge Lawrence Silberman, who recently passed, a great American, had started some of this when an email that he sent out to all federal judges was made public, that after some of the recent events on campus here, he had suggested that the students who were engaged in the disruptive protest, that he wasn't interested in hiring those students, and he suggested that perhaps other federal judges should not be interested as well. Jim has talked about, he had started giving some speeches about disruptive speech, as had I. And I had gone to Chicago, I had participated in an event in DC, in a student training event, talking about what I was going to do in response to disruptive speech, and that when I learned of students who had actually participated in these protests, in the shutting down. Again, I have no quarrel with protests, as I indicated, but the shutting down of the speakers, that I was not interested in hiring those students. And when I heard about Jim's speech and the boycott, Jim and I go way back. Jim is a very serious person. I've known him for more than 20 years. When he says something, it warranted reflection on my part. And so I thought about it, and then I called him and said I was going to join with him. And perhaps it's not the best option. We love hearing other options, but I think at this point we thought it might be the only option.
My friend David Latt, who is no longer a Yale student, but
yes,
who is an alum and is entitled to come back to campus, and we welcome him.
Yes, so I'm a Yale alum, and as you know, I've written quite a bit about the drama at Yale at my Substack newsletter. So I guess I have two questions. One is following up on Aram's question. What would it take? I think that your boycott actually has borne some fruit. I think we've seen some positive developments at Yale Law recently. What would it take for you to declare victory? What would it take? Because I think there's a concern about moving goalposts. What would it take for you to say, boycott's off, Yale's welcome here, everything is good? And then my second question is, the First Amendment protects free association as well as free speech, and it protects the right not to speak. For example, there's the famous Supreme Court case about not including the LGBT groups in the St. Patrick's Day parade. You talked about how we don't want to just have the First Amendment focused on government, and we have to have a culture of free speech, and private institutions like Yale and companies should respect free speech. But what about the First Amendment right to brand your university or your company or your law firm the woke law firm? What if I want to say, you know what? This is going to be woke university. That's our First Amendment right. Conservatives need not apply. And we can have pluralism across institutions, but why do we need to have tolerance or pluralism within institutions? I'm clearly playing devil's advocate because I do not agree with this point, but I'm just curious about your thoughts. Thank you.
What will it take to end the boycott? Why don't I start with that one, and then I'll pass the other one off to you. I'll take the easier one, perhaps. No, just kidding. So what would it take? And not to fail to answer your question, but we'll see. It took a lot to get us here, and so now we're watching. And we, as I said, we have not only seen some positive developments on campus and campuses, we've gotten a lot of feedback since we have been here, and I know I'm encouraged by some of those changes that I see that are occurring. And again, this is, to have us here when we have done something that has obviously made us well known at Yale is an important step, and we appreciate it. And when the offer was made, we jumped at the opportunity to come up, and we look forward to coming back again early next year. So those are all great things. And we know that there are some events, Jim has talked about them, that are planned. And so we will be watching to see how those events are handled. And so I think we're in a wait and see posture, but again, the boycott hasn't even gone into effect yet. So.
Yeah, so, I'll use a constitution analogy. There are bright line rules. You have to be 35 years old to be president, and there are standards like unreasonable search and seizure, equal protection. This is where it's, it's not necessarily easy to sort of reduce it into specific items, but you get the principle, the underlying standard. This is more in the standards bucket. And actually, equal protection is probably not a bad principle as I think about it. The goal, as I sort of alluded to, is to stop the cancellations, to have an environment where students can learn. Students can genuinely chase ideas, take logic to their consequences, challenge each other. And as I mentioned with the equal protection, not just a celebration of free speech, but a sense of non-discrimination, that people will not be discriminated against because they happen to hold certain views. I don't think it's a coincidence, the recent events that people know about all go into one particular philosophical direction. So when we see equality, non-discrimination, free speech, celebration of diversity in the truest sense, that is the objective, achieving that. Your second question, actually, both wonderful questions, but I really like the second question as well. There's absolutely nothing preventing any institution from taking on a more specific philosophical point of view. I think you mentioned not just schools, but you mentioned law firms. And I think there are law firms, certainly public interest law firms, who are explicitly conservative, explicitly liberal, explicitly passionate about one issue or another on one side or another. I think that's rather certainly ubiquitous in the legal profession. Not all lawyers sort of take all comers from clients. Many emphatically do not. I think there's absolutely nothing preventing a law school from doing that. But this is actually where I would contrast what Yale is doing with respect to U.S. News and what we are talking about. I'm not here to comment one way or the other on the U.S. News thing. I think it's an interesting debate in itself. But I think, as I understand what Yale is doing, it's trying to change U.S. News, right? U.S. News is doing one thing. U.S. News should actually do something very different. Its methodology is wrong. I'm not trying to change Yale. I'm trying to say, if Yale, you want to be a free speech entity. I think we've heard that that's something that Yale historically embraces since before the founding of the country. If that's the objective, that's something I celebrate. Let's just live up to that. So what I would say is, if I don't think that Yale is trying to make that explicit, woke, to use your word, open declaration. If it wanted to, that'd be a different conversation. But I think Yale is actually, if anything, resisting that, at least as I understand it. But I hope somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. They're trying to embrace free speech, and that's something that I warmly applaud.
And David, one quick response to your second question. As you certainly know, and as Jim just said, these organizations are free to decide if they want to label themselves as woke law firm or woke university. And on some level, maybe making that stand explicit is helpful to people, because then people know, okay, this is a woke law firm. And if you're woke, you might want to work there. And if you're not, you might want to stay away from there. And rather than, I think the problems arise when people are surprised. When you enter an institution, when you come into a university and you think, okay, there's a free speech code, and so I am free to engage in speech and debate, and then it is shut down. It's the surprise, I think, that causes the harm. If everybody knows what they're getting into, then I don't see where the harm is. And it's certainly, they're, as private institutions, they're free to do whatever they would like in that regard.
Kevin?
Thank you for coming out. And I want to make sure that I note the exceptions and the carve-outs that you made for current Yale Law students. With respect
Kevin
to,
is a current Yale Law student.
I am a current Yale Law student. I'm a 1L, so all of the events that happened over the summer and last semester I had nothing to do with because I was in Manhattan working at a hedge fund at the time. But I'm curious, what advice or what suggestions would you offer to current Yale Law students? And I'm thinking more so for myself because one of the things that excited me about coming to Yale Law School was the reputation that we have for placing graduates in federal clerkships. And so I'm curious, how does that interplay with the comments that you all have made, and especially to those of us like myself who may be members of the Federalist Society and may not necessarily agree with all of the viewpoints presented by the protesters at the events in question?
I think send us resumes. As I said, it does not apply to currently enrolled students. It would only be for people who would be entering in the next class. I have always considered Yale Law School students, and I will continue to do so until the boycott, if and when the boycott kicks in. But you are exempt from that, and if you want our addresses, we can probably give it to you afterwards.
I want to make sure, is there someone is Inez here? Did you have a question? Okay, she's from the Yale Daily News, and part of the First Amendment is freedom of the press. Now, freedom of the press actually did not refer to the institutional media. It actually referred to a printing press, but I do think it's in honor of William Buckley, who was the publisher of the Yale Daily News. I think you have priority, Inez.
Yeah, my name's Inez. I have a question about something you said in your speech announcing the boycott, about which you've referenced, which is that this will go into effect for students who have not yet matriculated into Yale Law. I'm curious, because you said in that speech that your hope in enforcing it in that way is that students will think long and hard about what kind of legal education they're seeking out. If you think that an outcome in which students who disapprove of maybe the ideological homogeneity of Yale Law currently, or the climate around free speech, not choosing to go to Yale Law, will be conducive to a cultural improvement that you're seeking in this boycott.
So I want to make sure I understand the question, because I think it's kind of overlaps with the previous discussion. Maybe I'll answer what I think is the same question in a different way. In the law, you have, in any case, you have sort of two phases. You have liability, as lawyers call it, liability and remedy. Okay, and what that means is you don't talk about what remedies the court needs to impose, damages, injunction, whatever. You don't need to have that conversation until you first decide, well, is the defendant even liable? Right. So the reason I use that analogy here is I think the goal that we all share is let's not get to the remedy if there is no need for a remedy. If Yale, I'll put it this way, I've heard in recent weeks and months, I've had wonderful conversations, a lot of wonderful people have reached out and sort of said, look, what happened last year was horrible. It was, I think one person used the term wake-up call, that a lot of people sort of realized, wow, we have been way off track. And one description I heard was that, the event this past spring was actually in a way a good thing, as ugly as it was. It was a good thing in the sense that people realized, okay, we clearly need a massive course correction. And as I understand it, and certainly as it's been represented to me, the course correction is taking place. Again, the goal here, at least speaking purely for myself, is not to cancel anyone. It's to stop institutions from canceling other people. So to my mind, that would be by far the ideal outcome is let's get back to regular order. Let's get back to respect for diversity. Let's get back to the law students learning law and having good conversations, the experience that I and I think others, I dare say, of my generation, that makes me feel old, but what I experienced was just a wonderful way of learning how to be a lawyer, learning how to represent any position, any client, any issue, whether totally disregarding what I personally believe, but just learning how to do this thing called lawyering without fear of acrimony, personal attacks. And I would think that should be true throughout your legal profession, but my goodness sake, for a law student, you're typically in your 20s, you're still learning what you think, I hope. You're still maturing, you're still exploring. I mean, to be held accountable for the rest of your life for something you wondered in class or wrote in an email when you're 20 whatever years old, honestly, that is not an America that our founders would recognize, and it's not an America that is motivating literally millions of people around the world to want to come here for. So, sorry to go on, but my point is, let's hopefully if there's no liability, there's no remedy. Having said that, I'll repeat what I said earlier. The key issue is getting to the solution. If there is a better remedy to get to that, to solve the problem, like I said, I am all ears. But it is a problem that cries out for a solution. And the last thing I'll say is, with limited time, I didn't want to sort of go through all the examples I've come across, but this is designed to help, frankly, more than anybody, students as they graduate and enter the real world. It's getting worse out there. I mean, just this morning, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on this very topic of people losing their jobs, losing opportunities for the crime of expressing out loud their personal viewpoints on a topic that is sensitive.
I think with luck, we're going to be able to get at least 2 more questions. Laura, over here, please. And while she's getting the microphone, he made a lot of legal analogies. I want to also tell you, he's a judge now, but he used to work in the Senate. He used a phrase, regular order. That's a Senate phrase, okay? Just in case you're interested in this.
Hello
he
to
said
both
return
of you.
to regular order. That's how they talk in the Senate.
Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for coming out here. My name is Laura. I work with one of the independent publications on campus, the YFP. And what we write, what we put into writing, and the words that we use are obviously something we think about a lot, and something that I think about a lot when I'm working with other people on their articles. One of the points I think that is often cited in the reasoning behind these types of protests is a equivocation between words and physical violence. Like, words is violence, and there is an argument perhaps similar to a stand your ground rule that acts of protest, even acts of violence during protests, is just a form of self-defense against speech, which is its own form of attack on an individual, just as bad as if one had come at them with a fist. And I am very curious, based on your personal opinions, based on your experiences as a judge, what you would say to that underlying philosophy, what you would say to that underlying belief, because it's pervasive, it's common, and there is a certain logic to it, because actions flow from thoughts, and if you shut down the thought, potentially you shut down the action. So I am very interested to hear how you would respond to that belief, to that underlying motivation.
And if we can be as quick as possible, we can get one more question. I have to leave, unfortunately, at 5:20 because I turned into a pumpkin. My apologies.
I think going back to what my remarks are, when you are confronted with speech you find objectionable, there are a number of ways to combat that, to sort of pick up on the violence term. And having that debate, saying I disagree with you, that is certainly what we grew up. That was what was happening at schools. Having that debate, and at the end of the day, people learn to disagree. I guess I have a problem with the fact that we are now somehow equating words with actions. Actions can certainly follow from words. They often don't, especially in a learning environment like this where people are exploring ideas and they need to have the freedom to do that. And as Jim has said, this contagion is spreading. It's spreading out into law firms, and it's causing adults to be afraid. And I think at the end of the day, who is in a better position to stand up for free speech, to try to encourage us to get back to the discussion and away from the violence or the shutting down than federal judges? I mean, we are in the safest position of most people, of even most adults, to do this. And that's why I find myself here today.
That's
You want to talk
okay,
about- I'm happy
one
to-
more. Please. I don't know your name. My apologies.
Yeah, so I'm Tasha. I'm a student in the college. And my question for you is, you guys talked both a lot about how conservative students should stand their ground. I'm a conservative student in the college, and respectfully, I want to say that's sometimes a lot easier said than done, because, so I guess what I'm wondering is what your message to conservative students is, because as easy as it is for me right now to sit here among people who I imagine tend to be fairly accepting of conservative viewpoints, when I'm sitting in a classroom and my GPA is at stake or other opportunities are at stake, I don't really want to stand up and say, hey, you know what, this is my viewpoint. I learned that very quickly in the first semester of my freshman year, that I had certain professors, certain teaching assistants who would deny me opportunities, or friends I've seen conservative friends sniggered at as they walk across courtyards. And so, frankly, I do self-censor, and when my future is at stake, I don't necessarily. Sometimes it's better for me to just sit back, not bite my tongue, and then in 4 years I'll be able to say what I want.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you for asking that question. This is a topic that I've tried to explore with students really every time I go on a campus and talk. We alluded to a couple things earlier. One, that we're life tenured, right? It's the easiest. I mean, we have the easiest way of speaking out. What you all are experiencing is not remotely what we experienced when we're not life tenured, when we were students. It's just, what I'm seeing right now on campuses is just not comparable. And so I get that it is very, maybe even smug for somebody with life tenure to say, oh, just be more brave. Totally get it. The hard answer is I don't have a good answer for you. That's why I'm struggling with trying to figure out how to, as I said earlier, how to get back to regular, how to get back to our traditions. Here's the only thing that I've been able to come up with so far. Okay, and I'll just share this with the understanding that it is extraordinarily modest and ineffective. If you can be the first person to speak up about something, great, good for you, that is wonderful. But I get it, especially for students, you're just starting your lives, I think you said you might be a freshman, you're just starting your collegiate career. I mean, to end your life and end your career when it's just barely beginning is a monumentally unfair thing to ask. So here's what I would shift to. If you can't be the first person to speak up on something, at least try to be the second. And what I mean by that is you don't even necessarily have to agree with the thing being said. Just give the person cover. Acknowledge that they make a fair point. Acknowledge that, you know what, that took some courage to say that. I may agree, I may disagree, but let's keep continuing it. I think there is a lot of, what you see in the self-censorship is an assumption that you're the only one who thinks something. And that may or may not be true, and you won't really even know until you actually speak out and see if there's a second or third person in the room. So if somebody's willing to do it, if you agree with it, try to be that second person at a minimum. In my speech, I quote from the movie Ratatouille, which is admittedly not the most intellectually high-minded thing to quote from, but there's a speech at the very end from the food critic. The new needs friends. When somebody is willing to speak up and be brave, that person needs friends.
We got 1 minute left. Judge Branch?
I don't even know how to put this in 1 minute. Find people, there are organizations on campus, whatever your belief system is, conservative, liberal, I don't care, what religion, what group you want to be a part of, join those groups. You will find people who embrace the thoughts that you're having. You don't have to do this alone. And I guess my concern about standing firm was more in, please be careful before you sign a follow-on letter that says, I support this fact that the students stop the speech. There is bullying that goes on there. Stand firm on that. That's hard, but it's not. Standing up and expressing and being the first person is probably harder, but saying, I'm not signing off on that letter, maybe that's a little less hard. Maybe we start with that first. I recognize what I'm saying is hard, but I'm hoping to give you the encouragement to stand firm.
Would you all please join me in thanking our guests?
Seriously.